and greetings from Abu Dhabi, the UAE. I have two distinguished guests today on the program, Dr. Peter Aiken and Todd Harbour. I wanted to move on to the concept because you mentioned it earlier, Todd. Peter, I believe, is this your baby, the data matrix?
Well,
and the implications on society. So
we had a lovely conversation. So Todd and I had a lovely conversation about this. I personally agree with the way that Todd frames it. I didn't want to frame it as that in the book for purposes of making it a little bit easier. But Todd, tell them the brutal truth about data syndicates.
Oh, yeah.
So I like the word or the phrase a data syndicate because it started with a very, very good purpose, bringing information and access to the masses. But society over time recognized certain attributes and properties about that model, that pattern, and began applying the same name to illegal activities. And what Peter and I talked about ad nauseum was we see similar effects happening today relative to data. You know, social media started off with the best of intentions. It really did. You know, my mom got pictures of her grandkids and all of these wonderful things about bringing people together. But what those companies realize is that you and I are the product in many cases, and there is value in measuring and metering all things about us that can be used for completely different purposes than helping my mom see the picture of her new grandbaby. Right. So this phrase, the data syndicate, because they were making money off us for completely different purposes, now starts to, it seems to follow a very similar pattern of what's happened relative to television and radio. Now, Peter wanted to have a slightly different word for the same idea, the data matrix, and Peter has some very interesting ideas about the matrix as in the movie and how there are patterns there that are worth sharing as well. You want to talk about those, Peter?
Actually, let's take it from a different perspective. So the only reason I use matrix instead of syndicate is because more people are familiar with the matrix as a concept and they understand that, the battery is hooked up to the giant computers. But the other thing that is a problem from a syndicate perspective is that it doesn't work very well. So if I told you, for example, that Althea, I was going to put you on a plane, or Todd, you've literally just gotten off a plane and I got off one yesterday, and that plane had a 50% chance of killing you, you'd think twice about whether you were going to do this. At the moment,
I'm not getting on.
At the moment, these technology platforms have no ability to control what they're doing. So, for example, we know that Facebook spends 88% of its remediation things that they're trying to do, scrubbing the internet from, anti-vax material and things like this in the United States.
Wow.
And they suck at what they're doing in the United States. So the idea that that's the United States, and now we've got to imagine the rest of the world is out there. These products are unsafe for consumers. They are unsafe for society. They should never have been allowed to get started in the first place until you can prove that you have got a product working, because we don't get on airplanes with the idea of maybe this will work and maybe it won't, but we are doing tech, and I think that's horrible.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I think you also reference Amy Webb's book in this piece of work as well, and it's really frightening if you really think about it. But I mean, I'd like to also go back, because I'm definitely a person glass half full. When there's a will, there's a way. So you've made it very clear in this book, data literacy is absolutely not just for data professionals. And there's an array of different data professionals. Not many people think about data and they think about, data scientists, but there's a whole bunch of other, let's say, data professionals, engineers, architects, modelers, governance people, whatever, and of course, data leaders, but also the non-traditional, let's say the newer pioneering roles in data. So that they're all there. And yes, they do need to be more literate and work coherently together. That's clear. But what your big appeal in this book is saying, if it's the larger audience, meaning society or knowledge workers for organizations, both governments and commercial organizations, there's the powerhouse, of getting things right for society, getting things right for organizations. So tell us a little bit more about what you think we could achieve if we got, for example, knowledge workers, more productive. What would happen differently than what's happening right now, as a result of being data literate?
If you look at the actual research that's been done, almost all knowledge workers indicate that they could use some additional data literacy. In fact, when Todd and I talk to groups of executives, we know that 4 out of the 5 of them sitting around that table would literally pay us directly to make them smarter about data, but they don't want everybody else to know because they think they're the only one at the table that is not ready to go on this. And so consequently, we need to educate the executives as well as we need to educate the knowledge workers as well as the data professionals. Just because you have a title that says something about data in it, it usually means you understand a portion of data. We use technology, of course, the blind people and the elephant. Some people think data is all about the trunk. Some people think it's all about the tusks. Some people think it's about the legs, all of this sort of thing. And unless they have a holistic perspective, they really don't. So when you look at data science in particular, 80% of data scientists' time is spent munging the data. Well, they've never been taught to do this. They don't know there are tools and techniques and methods that they can apply to this that will make their task faster, better, and cheaper. They also don't know the context in which they're solving the problems. So they may be pushing for a perfect solution, and when a 75% solution would have been absolutely perfect along those lines.
Exactly. This is the concept of inclusive data teams, where you have the roles allocated to the right data profile instead of munching it all over to one particular role. So in perspective of, if you wanted to wrap up the biggest, let's say the most important things that you'd like the audience, the wider audience, to get out of this book, what are the kind of key messages, the last statements each of you would like to share with the larger audience? Can I start with Todd then, in your car?
Yeah. So my thought is actually something that I'm pretty sure that nobody is ever going to want to do, and sadly, I feel like I'm the one person who does do it, which is make sure you're reading your privacy statements when you go on websites and download applications. And I say that because by law, a lot of these companies have to declare what their intentions are. And it's really important to understand what those companies plan to do with your data. And I'll give you a really good example. I was curious one day and I wanted to know how many steps away was my healthcare data from Facebook and Google and those companies, because I offer them nothing deliberately. I specifically refuse to do business with them. So I have a very large, very popular healthcare provider, and I started reading their privacy statement, and I started to map it out. And I was exactly 2 steps away from having Facebook and Twitter and Google and the other companies have access to my healthcare information. At the same time, I have never given them first-party consent.
Wow.
Never given them first-party consent. I suspect I'm not alone. But these are the things that's going on. And if people don't understand, in other words, if they're not literate and understand where they're giving their data, what's possible to do with your data, what the consequences of those decisions are, that's a really big and important societal set of questions. And I think personally, I want people to start asking those questions.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a really scary thought that you just mentioned, because I think you're right. I really think that most people don't realize what they're giving away. It's like, oh, it's just so much legal jargon. I don't want to read it. Or it's all the same, so I don't want to read it. It's just a bit too, it's kind of buried in a lot of information, right? So
that's right.
It's
that's
hard.
right. Ancestry.com has one of the most interesting privacy statements I've seen. When you agree to use their software, or have your DNA tested, you're granting them worldwide perpetual license to use your data and any derivatives for anything they want.
Oh,
Now,
wow.
sometimes that may be perfectly fine. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know the use cases.
I really love being in discovering different industries. I find it fascinating, all the different contexts and stories, and being a data chick, I love seeing that data can make such a big impact all over the place. It's wonderful. It's not all bad. You can do good.
That's right.
With data. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Althea.